Why your inner side is more powerful than you think. Let's begin with a question. When was the last time you truly sat with your own discomfort? Not just a passing annoyance or frustration, but the deep unease that comes from within, the kind that feels like it's trying to tell you something, even when you'd rather not listen. Most of us spend our lives running from this discomfort, distracting ourselves, numbing the pain, or trying to bury it under layers of positivity and self-help mantras. But what if I told you that the parts of yourself you avoid, the shadows, the fears, the doubts, are not only more powerful than you think, but hold the key to understanding who you truly are? In the words of Carl Jung, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Let that sink in for a moment. Jung believed that within each of us lies a hidden world, a shadow self made up of all the traits, desires, and feelings we reject or suppress. Maybe it's anger, jealousy, or fear. Maybe it's the part of you that doubts your worth or secretly resents the people you love. Whatever it is, this shadow isn't just a weakness or flaw. It's a mirror reflecting the parts of yourself you've been too afraid to confront. And here's the twist: the more you suppress it, the more power it gains over you. Think about it. How often do you feel like your emotions are controlling you? Have you ever lashed out in anger, only to regret it moments later? Or felt overwhelmed by anxiety, even when everything in your life seemed fine? These moments aren't random. They're your shadow speaking to you, demanding to be heard. But instead of listening, we treat these feelings like enemies, something to be defeated or silenced. Why? Because it's easier to blame the world, or even ourselves, than to face the uncomfortable truth that the negativity we feel isn't an intruder. It's a part of us. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While most of us see our inner negatives as something to escape, they can actually be a source of immense power and insight. Think of your shadow as a kind of psychological GPS, guiding you toward the areas of your life that need the most attention. For example, if you're constantly jealous of others, it might be pointing you toward unfulfilled desires or insecurities you've been ignoring. If you're consumed by anger, it could be highlighting boundaries that have been crossed or values you've compromised. Your shadow doesn't lie. It shows you who you are, stripped of pretense and illusion.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But here's the catch: this process isn't easy. Facing your shadow means acknowledging parts of yourself you'd rather deny. It means admitting that you're not always the person you want to be, and that's terrifying. But it's also liberating, because the moment you stop running from your shadow, you start reclaiming the energy you've been using to suppress it, and that energy can be channeled into something extraordinary: growth. Let's pause for a moment. Ask yourself, when was the last time you felt truly free? I don't mean free in the sense of having no responsibilities or obligations. I mean free from the weight of your own mind, free to be exactly who you are without fear or shame. If that feels like a distant memory, you're not alone. Most of us live in a kind of psychological prison, locked in by the very traits we refuse to acknowledge. But what if the key to escaping that prison isn't to fight against your shadow, but to embrace it? This is where the idea of integration comes in. According to Jung, the goal isn't to eliminate your shadow, it's to integrate it into your conscious self. This means accepting your flaws, understanding your fears, and learning to work with your inner negatives rather than against them. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. And wholeness is where true power lies. So how do we start this journey? How do we begin to confront the parts of ourselves we've spent a lifetime avoiding? It starts with self-awareness. The next time you feel anger, sadness, or fear, resist the urge to push it away. Instead, Ask yourself, where is this feeling coming from? What is it trying to tell me? And most importantly, what would happen if I stopped fighting it and simply let it be? You might be surprised by what you discover. Often, our most negative emotions carry messages we desperately need to hear. They reveal the wounds we haven't healed, the dreams we've abandoned, and the truths we've been too scared to face. And as painful as it is to confront these things, it's also profoundly freeing. Because once you've faced your shadow, it loses its power to control you. But let me leave you with this question: if your inner negatives are so powerful, what does that say about the rest of you? If even the darkest parts of your psyche can offer wisdom and strength, how much potential are you hiding in the parts you've yet to uncover? What would happen if you stopped running not just from your shadow, but from yourself? The shadow as a teacher learning from what we fear most. Imagine for a moment that your shadow, the part of yourself you've spent years avoiding, isn't your enemy but your teacher. What would it say to you if you stopped to listen? The idea might seem strange, even unsettling at first. After all, we're conditioned to believe that our fears, insecurities, and inner conflicts are obstacles to overcome. But what if they're not obstacles? What if they're lessons? Carl Jung believed that the shadow holds the keys to self-discovery because it contains everything we've hidden or rejected about ourselves. Think of it like a dark room in your mind, filled with forgotten pieces of who you are. Most of us keep the door tightly shut, terrified of what we might find if we open it. But here's the paradox: the more you avoid this room, the more its contents seep into your life in unexpected and often destructive ways. The anger you suppress might explode at the wrong time. The fear you deny might keep you from taking risks. The desires you repress might turn into shame. By refusing to face the shadow, we give it power over us. But when you step into that dark room and start to look around, something remarkable happens. You begin to see patterns. You realize that the parts of yourself you fear most aren't random, they're deeply connected to your experiences, your wounds, and your unmet needs. They're trying to tell you something. And if you're willing to listen, these negative aspects of yourself can teach you more about who you are than any external achievement or validation ever could. Let's explore this with an example. Imagine someone who struggles with jealousy. On the surface, jealousy feels like a purely negative emotion, something to be ashamed of, something to hide. But if that person were to sit with their jealousy and ask where it's coming from, they might uncover a deeper truth. Maybe they feel inadequate because they've been comparing themselves to others. Maybe they have unfulfilled dreams that they've been afraid to pursue. Or maybe their jealousy is pointing to a lack of self-acceptance. In this sense, the jealousy isn't just a problem, it's a signal. It's saying, look here. This is where you need to grow. The same is true for fear. Think about what you're most afraid of. Is it a failure, rejection, loss? Now, ask yourself, what does this fear reveal about your values, your desires, or your vulnerabilities? If you're afraid of failure, it might mean you deeply care about succeeding in something meaningful. If you fear rejection, it might point to a longing for connection and acceptance. Fear, like all emotions, isn't inherently bad. It's a guide. It shows you what matters to you and where you need to heal. But here's the hard part: learning from your shadow requires humility. It requires admitting that you don't have all the answers, that you're not always the person you want to be, and that you still have work to do. This can feel like a blow to the ego, especially in a world that glorifies perfection and constant positivity. But the truth is, growth doesn't happen in the light. It happens when you're willing to step into the darkness and face what's there without judgment. Integration, the art of becoming whole. What does it mean to become whole? It's a question that has haunted humanity for centuries, wrapped in layers of philosophy, psychology, and spirituality. To Carl Jung, wholeness wasn't about being perfect or unblemished. It wasn't about eliminating flaws or silencing the darker parts of ourselves. Wholeness was about integration, the act of bringing together all the fragmented pieces of who we are, both light and dark, into a unified self. And this act, this journey, is one of the most challenging and rewarding pursuits a person can undertake. But what does it look like to integrate your shadow? And why does it matter? To answer that, we need to confront a truth that most of us resist. The parts of ourselves we suppress don't disappear. They lurk beneath the surface, influencing our thoughts, actions, and relationships in ways we often don't realize. A repressed shadow might show up as self-sabotage, a quick temper, or an inability to connect deeply with others. It might manifest as chronic anxiety or as a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction, even when everything in your life appears fine. The shadow doesn't stay quiet, it finds ways to express itself, whether we like it or not. Integration is the process of making the unconscious conscious. It's about taking the parts of yourself you've hidden in the dark and bringing them into the light of awareness. This doesn't mean you have to act on every impulse or indulge every emotion. It means acknowledging these parts of yourself, understanding their origins, and finding a way to work with them rather than against them. Imagine, for example, that you're someone who struggles with anger. Maybe you've spent years trying to suppress it, convincing yourself that good people don't get angry. But suppressing anger doesn't make it go away, it just pushes it underground, where it festers. Over time, this repressed anger might explode in destructive ways, or it might turn inward, manifesting as self-doubt or even depression. Integration, in this case, doesn't mean letting your anger run wild. It means understanding where your anger comes from. Is it a response to feeling disrespected? A sign that your boundaries have been crossed? A reaction to unmet needs? By acknowledging your anger and exploring its roots, you can begin to use it as a tool for self-awareness and change, rather than letting it control you. The same principle applies to fear, jealousy, shame, or any other emotion you've been taught to suppress. Each of these emotions carries a message. Each is a piece of the puzzle that makes up who you are. Integration doesn't mean erasing these emotions, it means learning to listen to them, to understand what they're trying to tell you, and to respond with compassion rather than resistance. This process isn't easy. It requires a level of honesty and vulnerability that can feel deeply uncomfortable. It means admitting that you're not always the person you want to be, that you have wounds you haven't healed and fears you haven't faced. But it also means stepping into your own power. Because once you've integrated your shadow, once you've made peace with the parts of yourself you used to reject, you're no longer at war with yourself. You're no longer wasting energy on suppression or denial. Instead, you're free to channel that energy into growth, creativity, and connection. Think about this: how much of your life have you spent pretending to be something you're not? How often have you silenced your true feelings or hidden your true self out of fear of judgment or rejection? Integration is the opposite of pretending. It's the act of saying, "This is who I am, in all my complexity and imperfection," and in that act of self-acceptance, something remarkable happens: you become whole. Here's a question to sit with: if you were to embrace every part of yourself, the good, the bad, and the messy, what kind of person would you become? How much energy would you free up if you stopped fighting yourself and started working with yourself instead? Wholeness isn't about fixing yourself, it's about realizing that you were never broken to begin with. The power of embracing your full self. What would your life look like if you embraced every part of yourself, the light and the dark? the strengths and the flaws, the dreams and the fears. It's a question that feels both liberating and daunting. Most of us spend so much of our lives trying to be a version of ourselves that fits the mold: likable, successful, confident, and polished. But in that pursuit, we often abandon the parts of ourselves that don't fit the narrative. We bury them, hide them, and hope no one notices. Yet here's the paradox: the more we deny those parts, the more they quietly shape our lives, keeping us stuck in patterns of self-doubt, frustration, and unfulfilled potential. To embrace your full self is to unlock a kind of power that few ever truly access. It's not the power you might associate with external success or control over others. It's something far deeper: the power to live authentically, to stand rooted in who you are without apology or pretense. This kind of power doesn't come from perfection, it comes from wholeness. And wholeness requires courage, the courage to face your shadow and integrate it into your life. Think about this: how much energy do you spend hiding the parts of yourself you don't like or trying to be someone you're not? Every time you pretend to be fine when you're struggling, every time you suppress your anger or sadness, every time you chase external approval at the expense of your own truth, you're giving away pieces of yourself. Over time, this creates an inner fracture, a split between who you are and who you think you should be. The result: a life that feels disconnected, like something is always missing, even if everything on the surface seems right. But when you embrace your full self, something extraordinary happens. The fractures begin to heal. You start to see that your so-called flaws are not weaknesses but sources of wisdom. Your doubts and fears become opportunities for growth. Your shadow, once the part of you you feared most, becomes an ally, a guide that helps you navigate the complexities of life with greater insight and authenticity. Let's take fear as an example. For most of us, fear is something to avoid. It makes us hesitate, second-guess ourselves, or shrink away from challenges. But fear is also a powerful teacher. It shows us where we feel vulnerable, where we're stepping into the unknown, and where we have the most potential to grow. When you stop running from fear and start embracing it, you begin to see it for what it really is: a signal that you're on the edge of transformation. The same is true for shame. Shame can feel suffocating, like a weight that drags us down and keeps us small. But shame also reveals where we've internalized judgment from society, family, or even ourselves. When you embrace your shame, you begin to question those judgments. You start to rewrite the story, replacing self-criticism with self-compassion. And in doing so, you reclaim the parts of yourself that shame once told you to reject. Embracing your full self doesn't mean you'll never struggle or feel uncertain. It doesn't mean you'll magically solve all your problems or never experience pain. What it does mean is that you'll stop fighting yourself. You'll stop wasting energy on hiding, pretending, or conforming to expectations that don't align with who you are. Instead, you'll channel that energy into living fully and authentically. Here's the truth: the world doesn't need more people who are perfect. It needs people who are real, people who have faced their shadows, embraced their imperfections, and chosen to live as their whole selves. Because when you do that, you give others permission to do the same. You become a source of inspiration not because you have it all figured out, but because you've learned to embrace the messiness of being human. So, let me leave you with this question: what parts of yourself are you still running from? What would happen if, instead of running, you turned around and embraced them? What would your life look like if you stopped trying to be enough for others and started being everything you already are? The power of embracing your full self isn't just about personal freedom, it's about transformation. It's about stepping into the version of yourself that isn't defined by fear or shame, but by authenticity, courage, and connection. And when you do that, you don't just change your life, you change the lives of everyone around you.